A mechanic stops to help a crying woman in the middle of a dark road. The next morning, he's stunned when a luxurious limousine pulls up to his modest house, and what happens next changes his life forever. Marcus wiped his grease-stained hands on a worn cloth as he locked up his small auto repair shop on the outskirts of Pine Valley. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind rustled through the maple trees, scattering crimson leaves across the empty parking lot. Another long day of oil changes, brake repairs, and managing a business that barely kept the lights on. But it was honest work, and that's all that mattered since returning from Iraq. The war had left its marks, some visible in the slight limp in his right leg, others hidden deeper where no one could see. His shop, Marcus's Motors, wasn't much, but it was his sanctuary, a place where the methodical work of fixing engines helped quiet the memories that still haunted his dreams. The familiar scent of motor oil and metal brought him peace in a way that therapy never could. As he climbed into his old Ford pickup, the same one he'd bought before his deployment, his phone buzzed with another message from his sister Sarah, probably checking if he was still coming to Thanksgiving dinner this year. He hadn't gone last year, or the year before. Being around happy families just reminded him of everything he'd lost, of the life he might have had if things had gone differently in Fallujah. The clock on his dashboard read 9:47 p.m. as he turned onto the winding road that led home. The route was familiar, lined with towering pines and the occasional flickering streetlight. Usually the solitude of the drive home gave him time to decompress, to let go of the day's tensions. But tonight was different. Through the misty drizzle, his headlights caught a figure standing in the middle of the road. A woman, her shoulders shaking with sobs, her expensive-looking dress soaked through from the rain. Marcus slowed his truck, years of military training making him cautious. In Pine Valley, strange situations at night usually meant trouble, and he'd learned the hard way that not everything was what it seemed. Still, something about the woman's obvious distress tugged at him. He couldn't just drive by, not when someone might need help. He pulled over about 20 feet away, leaving his headlights on. The rain had picked up, drumming steadily on the roof of his truck. Through the windshield, he could see the woman more clearly now. She was probably in her mid-30s, wearing what looked like an evening gown, though it was hard to tell with how soaked she was. Her dark hair clung to her face, mascara running down her cheeks. Marcus grabbed the flashlight from his glove compartment and stepped out into the rain. His boots splashed in the puddles as he approached, keeping a reasonable distance. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice carrying over the sound of rainfall. "Are you all right?" The woman turned toward him, startled. In the beam of his flashlight, her eyes were red from crying, but there was something else there too. Fear, maybe desperation. She took a small step back, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, lowering the flashlight slightly. "I'm a mechanic. My shop's just down the road. Are you having car trouble?" He gestured to the sides of the road, but there was no vehicle in sight. The woman shook her head, wiping at her eyes with trembling hands. "No, I just needed to get away. I started walking and..." Her voice cracked. "I don't even know where I am anymore." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the feeling all too well. Sometimes the need to escape became so overwhelming that direction and destination stopped mattering. He'd had nights like that himself, when the memories got too loud and driving aimlessly seemed like the only way to outrun them. "Look," he said, keeping his voice gentle, "you're about 8 miles outside of Pine Valley. It's not safe out here at night, especially in this weather. Let me at least give you a ride into town. There's a diner that's open 24/7. You can get warm, maybe call someone." She hesitated, studying his face in the glow of the truck's headlights. Marcus stayed where he was, patient, non-threatening. He knew what it was like to be at the end of your rope, to have to trust a stranger because there were no other options left. Finally, she nodded, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I'm Catherine." "Marcus," he replied, leading her to his truck. He opened the passenger door for her, then retrieved an old but clean blanket from behind the seat. "Here, you must be freezing." As they drove toward town, the silence in the cab was broken only by the rhythmic swish of the wipers and Catherine's occasional sniffles. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, giving her space to compose herself. A mechanic stops to help a crying woman in the middle of a dark road. The next morning, he's stunned when a luxurious limousine pulls up to his modest house, and what happens next changes his life forever. Marcus wiped his grease-stained hands on a worn cloth as he locked up his small auto repair shop on the outskirts of Pine Valley. The autumn wind rustled through the maple trees, scattering crimson leaves across the empty parking lot. Another long day of oil changes, brake repairs, and managing a business that barely kept the lights on. But it was honest work, and that's all that mattered since returning from Iraq. The war had left its marks, some visible in the slight limp in his right leg, others hidden deeper where no one could see. His shop, Marcus's Motors, wasn't much, but it was his sanctuary, a place where the methodical work of fixing engines helped quiet the memories that still haunted his dreams. The familiar scent of motor oil and metal brought him peace in a way that therapy never could. As he climbed into his old Ford pickup, the same one he'd bought before his deployment, his phone buzzed with another message from his sister Sarah, probably checking if he was still coming to Thanksgiving dinner this year. He hadn't gone last year, or the year before. Being around happy families just reminded him of everything he'd lost, of the life he might have had if things had gone differently in Fallujah. The clock on his dashboard read 9:47 p.m. as he turned onto the winding road that led home. The route was familiar, lined with towering pines and the occasional flickering streetlight. Usually the solitude of the drive home gave him time to decompress, to let go of the day's tensions. But tonight was different. Through the misty drizzle, his headlights caught a figure standing in the middle of the road, a woman, her shoulders shaking with sobs, her expensive-looking dress soaked through from the rain. Marcus slowed his truck, years of military training making him cautious. In Pine Valley, strange situations at night usually meant trouble, and he'd learned the hard way that not everything was what it seemed. Still, something about the woman's obvious distress tugged at him. He couldn't just drive by, not when someone might need help. He pulled over about 20 feet away, leaving his headlights on. The rain had picked up, drumming steadily on the roof of his truck. Through the windshield, he could see the woman more clearly now. She was probably in her mid-30s, wearing what looked like an evening gown, though it was hard to tell with how soaked she was. Her dark hair clung to her face, mascara running down her cheeks. Marcus grabbed the flashlight from his glove compartment and stepped out into the rain. His boots splashed in the puddles as he approached, keeping a reasonable distance. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice carrying over the sound of rainfall. "Are you all right?" The woman turned toward him, startled. In the beam of his flashlight, her eyes were red from crying, but there was something else there too. Fear, maybe desperation. She took a small step back, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, lowering the flashlight slightly. "I'm a mechanic. My shop's just down the road. Are you having car trouble?" He gestured to the sides of the road, but there was no vehicle in sight. The woman shook her head, wiping at her eyes with trembling hands. "No, I just needed to get away. I started walking and..." Her voice cracked. "I don't even know where I am anymore." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the feeling all too well. Sometimes the need to escape became so overwhelming that direction and destination stopped mattering. He'd had nights like that himself, when the memories got too loud, and driving aimlessly seemed like the only way to outrun them. "Look," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "You're about 8 miles outside of Pine Valley. It's not safe out here at night, especially in this weather. Let me at least give you a ride into town. There's a diner that's open 24/7. You can get warm, maybe call someone." She hesitated, studying his face in the glow of the truck's headlights. Marcus stayed where he was, patient, non-threatening. He knew what it was like to be at the end of your rope, to have to trust a stranger because there were no other options left. Finally, she nodded, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I'm Catherine." "Marcus," he replied, leading her to his truck. He opened the passenger door for her, then retrieved an old but clean blanket from behind the seat. "Here, you must be freezing." As they drove toward town, the silence in the cab was broken only by the rhythmic swish of the wipers and Catherine's occasional sniffles. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, giving her space to compose herself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Whatever had driven her to walk miles in an evening gown in the rain, it wasn't his place to pry. Sometimes the kindest thing you could do for someone was to just be present, to offer silence instead of questions. Little did Marcus know that this chance encounter on a rainy night would set in motion events that would transform not only his life, but the lives of everyone in Pine Valley. Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest acts of kindness, from simply choosing to stop when others would drive by. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Marcus heard the distinct sound of tires crunching on his gravel driveway. He was already on his second cup of coffee, a habit he'd never managed to break since his military days. Through his kitchen window, the sight that greeted him made him blink twice, wondering if he was still half asleep. A sleek black limousine, polished to mirror perfection, was pulling up to his modest single-story home. The vehicle looked absurdly out of place next to his weather-beaten pickup truck and the overgrown lawn he'd been meaning to mow for weeks. Marcus set down his coffee cup, his mind immediately going to Catherine from the night before. After dropping her at Jenny's diner, he'd made sure she was settled with a hot cup of tea before heading home. She'd seemed calmer by then, though her eyes still held shadows he recognized all too well. He stepped onto his front porch, the wooden boards creaking beneath his feet. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth from last night's rain. The limo's driver, a man in an impeccably tailored suit, emerged and opened the rear door. Marcus's breath caught in his throat when Catherine stepped out, looking completely transformed from the distraught woman he'd met hours ago. She wore a perfectly pressed business suit now, her dark hair elegantly styled, all traces of last night's mascara tears gone. But it was more than just her appearance that had changed. She carried herself differently, with an air of authority that made Marcus stand a little straighter, an old military response he couldn't quite shake. "Good morning, Marcus," she said, climbing the porch steps. Her heels clicked against the wood, the sound sharp and purposeful. "I hope I'm not too early. There's something we need to discuss." Before Marcus could respond, the driver retrieved a sleek leather briefcase from the limo and brought it to Catherine. She smiled at Marcus, but it was different from the vulnerable, grateful smile she'd given him last night. This one carried weight, purpose. "You must be wondering about last night," she began, her voice steady. "The truth is, I'm the CEO of Valley Tech Industries. We're the largest technology manufacturer in 3 states, though we tend to keep a low profile here." She paused, studying his reaction. "Last night I had just left a board meeting where I discovered something that could destroy everything I've built." Marcus listened, his mind racing to reconcile the sobbing woman from the rain-soaked road with the confident executive standing before him. Catherine opened the briefcase, pulling out a manila folder filled with documents. "One of my board members has been embezzling funds, millions of dollars. When I confronted him, he threatened me. Not just professionally, but physically." Her voice caught slightly, a glimpse of last night's vulnerability showing through. I panicked, started driving, then walking. I just needed to get away, to think." She held out the folder to Marcus. "But you did more than just help a stranger last night. You reminded me of something important. Integrity. The way you stopped, offered help without expecting anything in return. It made me realize I couldn't run from this fight." Marcus took the folder, though he didn't open it. "I'm not sure I understand what this has to do with me," he said carefully, the soldier in him assessing the situation, looking for angles he might be missing. Catherine's smile widened. "I've spent the morning doing some research on you, Marcus. Distinguished service record, Bronze Star recipient, mechanical engineering training in the military. You're exactly what I need, someone with both the technical knowledge and the moral compass to help me clean up my company." She gestured to the briefcase. "I want to offer you a job, Marcus. Head of Operations Security. Your military background combined with your mechanical expertise makes you uniquely qualified. Plus, she added softly, you've already proven you're someone I can trust. Marcus stared at the folder in his hands, feeling the weight of more than just paper. It was the weight of change, of possibility, of purpose. After returning from Iraq, he'd opened his shop because fixing cars was simple, straightforward, safe. But now... I know it's sudden, Catherine continued, and probably seems crazy. But sometimes the craziest moments lead us exactly where we need to be. Think about it. The position comes with full benefits, and she named a figure that made Marcus's eyes widen slightly. Annual salary. Before he could respond, she turned to leave, her heels clicking back down the porch steps. At the limo, she paused and looked back. The folder contains all the details, including my direct number. Take the day to think it over. But Marcus? Her eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw both versions of her. The vulnerable woman from the rain and the powerful CEO. Thank you again. For everything. Marcus watched the limo disappear down his gravel driveway, the folder heavy in his hands. Through his open front door he could see his kitchen with its chipped coffee mug and worn linoleum floor. His simple, safe life. But maybe, he thought, it was time for something more. The morning sun caught the edges of the folder, gleaming like a promise of something new, something challenging, something that might finally fill the void he'd been carrying since returning home from the war. He walked back inside, sat at his kitchen table, and began to read. Marcus sat at his kitchen table well into the afternoon, the folder's contents spread before him like a map to a different life. Through the window, he could see his truck parked outside the house he'd bought after returning from Iraq, a fixer-upper that had given his hands something to do when the nightmares kept him awake. Both the truck and house remained works in progress, much like himself. His fingers traced the edge of his Bronze Star citation, which Catherine had somehow obtained and included in the dossier. The memory of that day in Fallujah came rushing back. The explosion, the screams of his unit trapped in their disabled vehicle, the way he'd managed to repair the engine under heavy fire just enough to get them to safety. 7 lives saved, the citation read, but it didn't mention the cost, the shrapnel in his leg, the months of rehabilitation, or the way loud noises still made his heart race. The position Catherine was offering would pay more in a month than his shop made in half a year. Head of Operations Security. It sounded impressive, worlds away from changing oil and fixing transmissions. But it wasn't the money that kept drawing his eyes back to the proposal. It was the challenge, the chance to protect something, to serve a purpose bigger than himself again. His phone buzzed, another message from Sarah. This time he opened it. Just checking in, big brother. Mom's asking about Thanksgiving again. We miss you. Attached was a photo of his niece Emma, holding up a crayon drawing of what looked like a family gathered around a table. His throat tightened at the sight of the stick figure in green that he knew was supposed to be him. 3 years. It had been 3 years since he'd sat at his family's table, since he'd let himself be part of their lives in any real way. After coming home, everything had felt too loud, too crowded, too full of expectations he couldn't meet. The shop had become his excuse. Someone always needed their car fixed, even on holidays. His family had seen through it, but they'd given him space, hoping time would heal wounds that went deeper than physical scars. Marcus stood, his legs stiff from sitting too long, and walked to the small bedroom he'd converted into a home office. In the closet, behind a row of rarely worn dress shirts, was a wooden box he hadn't opened in years. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it down, the weight familiar, yet strange. Inside were the remnants of his old life, dog tags, unit patches, photographs of smiling young men who'd never grown old. And there, wrapped in a faded bandana, was the letter. He didn't need to unfold it to remember every word. Jessica's goodbye, written after he'd come home changed, unable to be the man she'd fallen in love with before the war. You have to let someone in eventually, she'd written. You have to start living again. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor as Marcus returned to the kitchen. He picked up his phone, staring at Sarah's message and the picture of Emma's drawing. Maybe Jessica had been right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding behind the safe walls he'd built, Time to remember who he was beyond the wounds he carried. He thought about Catherine, how she'd transformed from the broken woman in the rain to the powerful CEO who'd stood on his porch. She'd trusted him twice now, first as a stranger in the night, and now with something even more precious. Her company, her fight against corruption, her future. There was something poetic about it, he realized. A mechanic and a CEO, both battling their own forms of darkness, both needing something the other could provide. Marcus picked up the folder again, this time reading between the lines of the corporate language and impressive salary figures. Valley Tech Industries wasn't just a company, it was Catherine's life's work, something she'd built from the ground up. Now someone was threatening to destroy it all, and she'd chosen him, a small-town mechanic with a limping gait and haunted eyes, to help her protect it. The sun was setting when Marcus finally reached for his phone again. But instead of responding to Sarah's message, he found himself dialing the number Catherine had left. It rang 3 times before her voice answered, confident but with an undercurrent of hope he might not have noticed if he hadn't seen her at her most vulnerable. "I have some questions," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. "About the position." The smile in Catherine's voice was evident as she replied, "I hoped you'd call. Ask me anything." As the evening deepened into night, Marcus felt something shift inside him, like rusty gears finally turning after years of disuse. Maybe this was what moving forward felt like. Maybe this was what healing looked like. Not a sudden transformation, but a series of small choices, each one bringing you closer to the person you were meant to be. The Valley Tech Industries headquarters loomed before Marcus, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that pierced the morning sky. He adjusted his tie, borrowed from his interview clothes box that had gathered dust since his military transition, and tried to ignore how out of place he felt among the stream of well-dressed professionals flowing through the revolving doors. His first week as head of operations security had been a blur of introductions, security protocols, and corporate politics that made military bureaucracy seem straightforward in comparison. Catherine had given him an office on the executive floor, a stark contrast to his humble garage, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The view still made him dizzy sometimes, reminding him how far he was from the familiar scent of motor oil and the simple problems of broken engines. Today marked his first major security briefing with the board of directors. As he rode the elevator to the top floor, Marcus couldn't help but think about how different this was from his usual Monday mornings. By now, he would have been elbow-deep in an oil change, radio playing classic rock, the world making sense in its own greasy way. Instead, he was carrying a leather briefcase, a gift from Catherine, filled with documents detailing the security vulnerabilities he'd discovered in just 1 week. The elevator doors opened to reveal Catherine waiting for him. She wore a deep blue suit that somehow made her look both powerful and approachable, a balance she seemed to master effortlessly. "Ready?" she asked, falling into step beside him as they walked toward the boardroom. "As I'll ever be," Marcus replied, feeling the weight of his bronze star pin on his lapel. Another gift from Catherine, recovered from his service records. "Though I have to admit, facing insurgents almost seems easier than facing a room full of corporate executives." Catherine's laugh was genuine, a sound he'd come to appreciate over the past week. "Trust me, you've faced worse. Just remember, you're here because you see things others miss. That's why I chose you." The boardroom was already full when they entered. 12 pairs of eyes turned to assess him, some curious, others barely concealing their skepticism. Marcus recognized Richard Sterling immediately, the board member Catherine had confided in him about, the one she suspected of embezzlement. He sat at the far end of the table, his expensive suit and carefully groomed appearance marking him as someone used to commanding respect. "Gentlemen, ladies," Catherine began, taking her place at the head of the table. "I'd like you to meet Marcus Davidson, our new head of operations security. He's here to present his initial findings after his first week with us." Marcus moved to the front of the room, setting up his presentation with steady hands. This was familiar territory in its own way. He'd briefed commanding officers under much worse circumstances. As he began speaking, outlining the security gaps he'd discovered, he noticed Sterling's expression shift from dismissive to concerned. "Our biggest vulnerability," Marcus continued, clicking to a slide showing the company's shipping manifests, "lies in our cargo tracking system. There are discrepancies in the routing algorithms that could allow someone to divert shipments without triggering immediate alerts. In fact," he paused, making eye contact with Sterling, "several shipments over the past 6 months have shown exactly this pattern." The room grew tense. Sterling shifted in his seat, his knuckles white against the armrests. "Are you suggesting," he began, his voice carefully controlled, "that someone is deliberately manipulating our shipping systems?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Marcus replied evenly. "I'm stating facts based on data. As a military engineer, I learned that patterns don't lie, even when people do." Catherine watched the exchange with carefully concealed satisfaction. This was exactly why she'd chosen Marcus: his directness, his inability to be intimidated by power or position. She'd seen it that night in the rain, when he'd approached her with nothing but genuine concern and respect. The meeting continued for another hour, with Marcus methodically laying out his findings and recommendations. By the end, even the most skeptical board members were nodding in agreement with his proposed security overhaul. Only Sterling remained silent, his eyes fixed on his tablet screen. As the board members filed out, Sterling lingered behind. Marcus watched him approach Catherine, their voices too low to hear, but the tension in their body language spoke volumes. Catherine's spine straightened, her chin lifting slightly, the same posture she'd shown that morning on Marcus's porch when she'd refused to run from this fight. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked as Sterling finally left, his departure marked by the sharp click of the boardroom door. Catherine's smile was tight but genuine. "Better than okay. You just confirmed everything I suspected, and did it in a way that leaves no room for denial. Though," she added, her voice softening, "I think we've just made a powerful enemy." Marcus gathered his materials, thinking about the patterns he'd discovered, the numbers that didn't add up, and the look in Sterling's eyes as he'd left. "In my experience," he said, "the people who react the most defensively are usually the ones with the most to hide." As they walked back to their offices, Catherine touched his arm lightly. "Thank you, Marcus. I know this is a big change from your shop, but it's where I need to be," he finished, surprising himself with how true it felt. The shop had been his haven, his hiding place. But maybe it was time to stop hiding and start fighting again, this time for something more than survival. 2 months into his role at Valley Tech Industries, Marcus found himself settling into a rhythm he hadn't expected. The corporate world, with all its unwritten rules and power plays, was beginning to make sense to him. His military training had taught him to observe, adapt, and overcome, skills that proved surprisingly valuable in navigating office politics and uncovering security breaches. His office had slowly transformed from its sterile corporate state into something more personal. A framed photo of his old unit sat on his desk, alongside a small model car he'd built during late nights when paperwork kept him at the office. The wall now featured a detailed map of Valley Tech's shipping routes, covered in his handwritten notes, and red strings connecting points of interest, a technique he'd learned in the military for tracking patterns. Catherine had taken to stopping by his office in the evenings, usually around the time most employees were heading home. Tonight, she carried 2 cups of coffee from the local shop down the street, having learned his preference for strong black coffee over the watered-down break-room variety. "You're going to want this," she said, setting 1 cup on his desk. "The audit reports just came in." She settled into the chair across from him, kicking off her heels, a small gesture that showed how comfortable they'd become with each other. "It's worse than we thought." Marcus took a long sip of coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. "How much worse?" 47 million, Catherine replied, her voice tight. "Sterling's been siphoning funds through a network of shell companies for years. The shipping discrepancies you found were just the tip of the iceberg." Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing the information. Over the past weeks, he'd been building a case against Sterling, tracking suspicious patterns in shipping manifests, following paper trails that led to empty warehouses and non-existent clients. But the scale of the fraud still surprised him. "We need to be careful how we handle this," he said, standing to study his wall map. A man willing to steal that much won't go down without a fight. Catherine joined him at the wall, her shoulder brushing against his as she traced one of the red strings with her finger. "I've noticed increased security around your house," she said quietly. "The unmarked car at the end of your street?" Marcus nodded, impressed she'd spotted it. Old habits die hard. When Sterling started making threats, I called in some favors from my unit days. They're keeping an eye on things. "I'm sorry," Catherine sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I never meant to drag you into danger." "Hey," Marcus turned to face her, his voice gentle but firm. "I walked into this with my eyes open. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "compared to Fallujah, corporate espionage is practically a vacation." Catherine laughed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Still, I worry. Sterling has connections, powerful ones, and after what happened to David..." Marcus's expression darkened. David Chen, a junior accountant who'd been helping them gather evidence, had been found in his apartment last week, badly beaten. The police called it a robbery gone wrong, but they all knew better. "That won't happen again," Marcus assured her. "I've implemented new security protocols for everyone involved in the investigation, and I'm personally vetting all the evidence before it goes to the FBI. Catherine nodded, but her eyes remained troubled. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. The company, the fight. Maybe I should have just walked away that night in the rain." "No," Marcus said firmly. "You built something important here, something worth protecting. And you're not alone in this fight anymore." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the space between them felt charged with unspoken words. Catherine's hand found his, squeezing gently. "Thank you, Marcus. For everything." The moment was interrupted by Marcus's phone buzzing, a text from Sarah. "Speaking of not being alone," Catherine said, glimpsing the message preview. "How did Thanksgiving go?" Marcus smiled, remembering the warmth of his family's welcome when he'd finally returned home for the holiday. Emma had proudly shown him every crayon drawing she'd made of him over the past 3 years, and his mother had cried when he'd walked through the door. It was good. Really good. I forgot how much I missed them. "You seem different," Catherine observed. "More at peace." "I am," Marcus realized. "For the first time since coming home, I feel like I'm doing something that matters, something worth getting up for in the morning." Catherine's smile was soft in the fading evening light. "You're making a difference here, Marcus. Not just with the investigation, but with the people. You should hear how the security team talks about you. They'd follow you anywhere." Marcus turned back to his wall of evidence, but his mind was on the journey that had brought him here. From a broken soldier hiding in his garage to this, protecting something valuable, building something meaningful, maybe even finding something he hadn't known he was looking for. "We should go over these audit reports," he said finally, though he made no move to release Catherine's hand. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Catherine squeezed his hand once more before letting go. "They're all long days lately, but somehow they don't feel as heavy as they used to." Marcus understood exactly what she meant. The weight was still there, the responsibility, the danger, the complexities of their situation. But it was easier to bear when you didn't have to carry it alone. The first sign that something was wrong came early on a Wednesday morning. Marcus arrived at the office before sunrise, a habit he'd never shaken from his military days, to find his security access card denied. He was standing in the lobby, frowning at the turnstile, when Catherine burst through the front doors, her face pale with urgency. "Don't use your codes," she said, grabbing his arm and pulling him aside. "Sterling's made his move. The board called an emergency meeting last night. They're trying to force me out." Marcus felt his combat instincts kick in, his mind immediately shifting into tactical assessment. "What happened?" "Someone leaked documents to the board," Catherine explained, her voice low as employees began trickling into the lobby. "Doctored financial records making it look like I've been the one embezzling funds. They've frozen my access to the systems, and there's a vote of no confidence scheduled for this afternoon." Marcus's jaw tightened. "The evidence we've gathered..." "Gone," Catherine cut him off. "The secure server was wiped clean last night, Everything we had on Sterling, all the tracking data, the audit reports. It's all gone. And that's not even the worst part. She pulled out her phone, showing him a news article that had just broken. The headline made his blood run cold. Valley Tech Industries CEO under federal investigation for fraud and embezzlement. Sterling's not just trying to discredit you, Marcus realized. He's setting you up to take the fall for everything. Catherine nodded, her composure cracking slightly. The FBI is executing a search warrant on my house as we speak. They'll find exactly what Sterling wants them to find. Fake documents, offshore account records, everything needed to make me look guilty. Marcus guided her to a quiet corner of the lobby, his mind racing. We need to move fast. Where's your personal laptop? In my office. Why? Because I didn't trust the company servers, Marcus said, a slight smile forming. Remember those security protocols I implemented? I've been keeping backup copies of everything on an encrypted drive, updated daily. But we need your laptop to access it. Hope flickered in Catherine's eyes, but quickly dimmed. We can't get to my office. Security's been ordered to escort me from the building if I try to go up. Marcus checked his watch. The lobby was getting busier, making it harder to talk without being overheard. Meet me at the coffee shop around the corner in 30 minutes. I have an idea, but I need to make some calls first. Catherine hesitated. Marcus, be careful. Sterling's already threatened David. If he finds out you're helping me. Let him try, Marcus interrupted, his voice hard. I've faced worse than corporate thugs. As Catherine slipped out of the building, Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Hey, Rodriguez, he said when his old unit mate answered. Remember that favor you owe me from Fallujah? I need to collect. The next 20 minutes were a blur of activity. 3 more calls to his former unit members, each one ready to help without question. A quick text to Sarah telling her to take their parents and Emma out of town for a few days, just in case. And finally, a call to a contact at the FBI he'd made during his military service, someone who might be willing to listen before jumping to conclusions. When Marcus walked into the coffee shop, Catherine was sitting in a corner booth, her usual confident posture replaced by barely contained anxiety. He slid into the seat across from her, placing a small USB drive on the table. How did you... she began. Better not to ask, Marcus said. Let's just say I had help from people who know how to get things done quietly. Everything we had is on this drive. The original shipping records, Sterling's shell companies, the real audit reports. But we need to move fast before he realizes what we've done. Catherine stared at the drive, then back at Marcus. Why are you risking everything for this? For me? Your career? Your safety? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question. You know, when you found me that night, I was just existing. Fixing cars, avoiding life, hiding from everything that mattered. You gave me a purpose again. Something worth fighting for. A corporate war wasn't exactly what you signed up for, Catherine said softly. No, Marcus agreed. But protecting people who deserve it? That's exactly what I signed up for, both in the military and here. The sound of police sirens in the distance made them both tense. Catherine's hand found Marcus's across the table, squeezing it tightly. What's our next move? Marcus squeezed back, his tactical mind already mapping out their strategy. First, we get this evidence to my FBI contact. Then we take the fight to Sterling. He thinks he's dealing with a CEO he can bully and a security chief he can outmaneuver. Time to show him he's actually dealing with a woman who built an empire from nothing and a soldier who doesn't know how to quit. Catherine's eyes met his, and in them he saw the same determination he'd witnessed that morning on his porch months ago. Together? She asked. Together, Marcus confirmed, standing. Now let's go win your company back. As they left the coffee shop, Marcus felt the familiar surge of pre-battle adrenaline. The enemy might be different, the battlefield changed, but the stakes were just as high. And this time, he had something. Someone worth fighting for. The cabin sat nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains, 3 hours from the city and off any GPS maps. Marcus had bought it years ago as a potential bug-out location, another habit from his military days that suddenly proved useful. As he pulled his truck up the gravel drive, Catherine let out a long breath beside him, some of the tension finally leaving her shoulders. "No one knows about this place?" she asked, taking in the rustic structure with its wraparound porch and sturdy walls. "Just my old unit," Marcus replied, killing the engine, "and they know how to keep secrets." He grabbed their bags from the back seat, her hastily packed suitcase and his go bag, always ready for emergencies. "The FBI contact said they'd need 48 hours to verify our evidence before moving on Sterling. We should be safe here until then." The interior of the cabin was simple but well-maintained. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, flanked by comfortable furniture Marcus had collected over the years. The kitchen was basic but functional, and a narrow staircase led to 2 bedrooms upstairs. It smelled of pine and wood smoke, a stark contrast to the sterile corporate environment they'd fled. "I'll get a fire started," Marcus said, noting the mountain chill in the air. "There's coffee in the kitchen if you want to make some." Catherine moved through the space, taking it all in. Her designer suit and heels looked out of place against the rustic backdrop, but there was something right about seeing her here, away from the corporate warfare they'd left behind. As she busied herself with the coffee maker, Marcus could see some of her CEO armor starting to crack. "You okay?" he asked softly, stacking logs in the fireplace. She paused, her hands stilling on the coffee canister. "I built that company from nothing," she said, her voice thick with emotion. 15 years of my life, every waking moment dedicated to making it something meaningful. And Sterling just..." She trailed off, blinking back tears. Marcus struck a match, watching the kindling catch. "Tell me about it," he said. "About how you started." Catherine leaned against the counter and slowly, the story began to pour out. How she'd started Valley Tech in her garage with nothing but a laptop and an idea. The years of sacrifice, the missed holidays, the relationships that fell apart because the company always came first, the pride of creating jobs, of building something that made a difference. As the fire grew and the coffee percolated, they settled onto the worn leather couch. Catherine had shed her blazer, her feet tucked under her, looking more vulnerable than Marcus had ever seen her. "You know what the worst part is?" she continued, cradling her coffee mug. "I trusted him. Sterling was there from the beginning. He invested when no one else would, mentored me through the early years. I never saw the betrayal coming." Marcus understood betrayal, had felt it sting in the battlefield when bad intel had cost him good men. "Sometimes the people closest to us have the best angle for the knife," he said quietly. Catherine turned to look at him. Really look at him. "What happened to you? In Iraq? You never talk about it." Marcus stared into the fire, the flames dancing in his eyes. "Had a unit under my command. Good men, all of them. There was this mission." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Intel said the route was clear. It wasn't. We lost 3 guys that day, and I got this." He gestured to his leg. "Spent months learning to walk again, longer learning to live with the fact that I'd led them into that ambush." "But it wasn't your fault," Catherine said softly, her hand finding his in the firelight. "Neither is what Sterling did to you," Marcus replied, meeting her gaze. "Sometimes good people trust the wrong ones. It doesn't make us weak. It makes us human." The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines, a soothing rhythm that seemed to exist outside the chaos they'd left behind. "Thank you," Catherine said after a while, her head resting against his shoulder. "Not just for this, for everything." Most people would have walked away when things got complicated. Marcus smiled slightly, remembering that rainy night that seemed so long ago now. "I'm not most people." "No," she agreed, looking up at him. "You're not." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and possibilities. In the soft glow of the fire, with the world held at bay by mountain darkness, they were just a man and a woman, stripped of titles and obligations. "We should get some rest," Marcus said finally, though he made no move to break their connection. "Tomorrow we start planning our counterattack." Catherine nodded but didn't move either. Just a few more minutes, she whispered. It feels safe here. Marcus tightened his hold on her hand, understanding completely. In a world where everything familiar had been turned against them, this moment of peace felt precious, necessary. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but for now, they had this. A fire's warmth, the mountain's silence, and the comfort of knowing they didn't have to face what was coming alone. The night deepened around the cabin, stars appearing in the clear mountain sky. Inside, two people who had found each other by chance sat together, finding strength in shared vulnerability and trust in shared purpose. Sometimes, Marcus thought, the safest harbors are found in the middle of the storm. The morning they returned to the city dawned cold and clear. Marcus's FBI contact had confirmed they were ready to move on Sterling, but the board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m., a meeting that could still destroy everything Catherine had built if they didn't play this perfectly. "Remember the plan," Marcus said as they pulled into the Valley Tech parking garage. "We need to get Sterling to incriminate himself in front of the board before the FBI moves in. Timing is everything." Catherine nodded, adjusting her suit jacket. She looked every inch the CEO again, her vulnerability from the cabin tucked away behind a mask of corporate confidence. "What about security? Sterling will have them watching for us." "Already handled," Marcus smiled slightly. "Let's just say my team from the service decided to pick up some temporary security work this morning." He touched the earpiece he was wearing, a direct line to Rodriguez and the others, now positioned throughout the building. They took separate elevators, Catherine to the boardroom floor and Marcus to his office. The plan relied on precise timing and the element of surprise. As he entered his office, Marcus quickly accessed his computer, initiating the program he'd prepared days ago. Within seconds, every screen in the building began displaying the same message. Emergency board meeting, attendance mandatory. "Alpha team in position," Rodriguez's voice crackled in his ear. "Sterling just entered the building. He's got 3 private security with him." "Copy that," Marcus responded, checking his watch. "Remember, no one moves until my signal." The boardroom was filling up when Marcus arrived. He could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut. Sterling sat at his usual place, looking smugly confident. When Catherine walked in, head held high, the room fell silent. "This is a closed meeting," Sterling said smoothly. "You're no longer authorized to be here." Catherine smiled, the kind of smile Marcus had learned to recognize as dangerous. "Actually, Richard, I think you'll want me to stay for this." She nodded to Marcus, who connected his laptop to the room's display system. "Before we begin," Marcus announced, his voice carrying the authority of his military years, "I should mention that this meeting is being broadcast live to every employee in the building." He saw Sterling's confidence flicker slightly. "Transparency is important, wouldn't you agree, Mr. Sterling?" The screens came to life, displaying shipping manifests, bank records, and surveillance footage. "These documents show a pattern of systematic theft," Marcus continued. "Money laundered through shell companies, shipments diverted to ghost warehouses, all leading back to one source." Sterling laughed, but there was an edge to it. "These are obviously fabricated. We've already established that Ms. Chen here is the one responsible for—" "Interesting you should mention fabrication," Catherine interrupted, her voice steel. "Because we also have something else to share." She nodded to Marcus again. The screens changed to show security camera footage from Sterling's office dated 3 nights ago. In it, Sterling could be clearly seen directing his security team to plant evidence in Catherine's office. The color drained from Sterling's face. This is nonsense. "I don't know what you think you're proving, but what we're proving," Marcus said, advancing toward him, "is that you not only stole from this company, you tried to frame its founder when she caught you. You threatened employees, orchestrated break-ins, and nearly destroyed something thousands of people depend on." Sterling's composure cracked. He lunged for his phone, but Marcus was faster, knocking it from his hand. Sterling's private security moved to intervene, but Rodriguez and the others emerged from their positions around the room, efficiently neutralizing the threat. "It's over, Richard," Catherine said, her voice steady. "The FBI has everything. The real evidence, your offshore accounts, even the hired muscle you sent after David Chen." Sterling's face contorted with rage. You think you've won? You have no idea what you're dealing with. I own judges, politicians. Actually, a new voice interrupted. Agent Sarah Martinez of the FBI stepped into the room, flanked by several agents. You've just confessed to multiple federal crimes in front of about 300 witnesses. Would you like to continue listing your accomplices? The next few minutes were chaos as Sterling was taken into custody, screaming threats and accusations. The board members sat in stunned silence, watching their colleague being led away in handcuffs. Catherine addressed the room, her voice carrying through the still active broadcast. Valley Tech was built on innovation, integrity, and trust. Today we've demonstrated that those values still matter. That the truth, no matter how hidden, eventually comes to light. As the room began to clear, Catherine turned to Marcus, her eyes bright with unshed tears. We did it, she whispered. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of the past few days finally lifting. You did it. You fought for what was yours. We fought, she corrected him, taking his hand. Around them, employees were filtering into the boardroom, many applauding, others coming up to express their support. Marcus watched Catherine accept their congratulations, saw the respect and admiration in their eyes, and felt a surge of pride. This was what fighting the good fight looked like in the civilian world, not with weapons and tactics, but with courage, integrity, and unwavering determination. The morning sun streamed through the boardroom windows, highlighting the scene of victory and vindication. It wasn't the kind of battle Marcus had been trained for, but standing there, watching justice prevail, he realized it was exactly the kind of fight he was meant to be in. The weeks following Sterling's arrest brought a whirlwind of changes to Valley Tech Industries. The board, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, unanimously reinstated Catherine as CEO with expanded powers and a public vote of confidence. The FBI investigation uncovered a network of corruption that stretched far beyond Sterling, leading to multiple arrests and a complete restructuring of the company's financial oversight systems. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, working closely with federal investigators to unravel the full extent of Sterling's operation. His military experience proved invaluable in tracking down the remaining threads of corruption, his methodical approach earning respect from both the FBI and the corporate world. One evening, as the sun set over the city skyline, Catherine found Marcus in his office, surrounded by papers and digital displays. He'd expanded his wall map to include a global network of Sterling's connections, each red string telling part of a story that grew more complex by the day. The FBI just called, Catherine said, settling into what had become her usual spot on the corner of his desk. Sterling's agreed to a plea deal. He's giving up names, lots of them. Apparently, the thought of federal prison has made him quite talkative. Marcus nodded, making a note on one of his displays. Good. The more we can clean up, the better. He paused, looking up at her. How are you holding up? Catherine sighed, running a hand through her hair, a gesture he'd come to recognize as her letting her guard down. It's strange. The company's stronger than ever. The board's fully behind me. Our stock price has actually gone up since the truth came out, and we're more transparent than we've ever been. But you still feel betrayed, Marcus finished softly. Yes. She stood, walking to the window. I keep thinking about all the years Sterling sat across from me in meetings, smiled at company parties, acted like a mentor and friend. How did I not see it? Marcus joined her at the window, their reflections overlapping in the glass. Sometimes the best camouflage is familiarity. We stop looking closely at what's right in front of us because we think we already know what we're seeing. Is that what happened to you? Catherine asked quietly. In Iraq? Marcus was silent for a moment, watching the city lights begin to twinkle in the growing dusk. We got comfortable. The route had been clear so many times before. We stopped looking for new threats in familiar places. It's a mistake you only make once. Catherine turned to face him, her expression soft in the fading light. You know, when I first offered you this job, I thought I was just getting a security chief, someone to help me fight back against Sterling. I never expected. To find someone who understood, Marcus supplied, meeting her gaze. To find someone who made me feel safe enough to be vulnerable, she corrected. Someone who showed me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about who's there to help you stand back up. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Marcus thought about that night in the rain, how a chance encounter had led him here. How helping a stranger had somehow helped him find his way back to himself. The company's annual charity gala is next week, Catherine said, breaking the silence. First major event since everything happened. I could use some backup. Marcus smiled slightly. Isn't that what security chiefs are for? I wasn't asking my security chief, Catherine replied, her eyes holding his. I was asking you. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed. A message from Rodriguez. Speaking of security, he said, reading the text. My team just finished the last sweep of Sterling's old contacts. We're clear. No more threats, no loose ends. Catherine nodded, relief visible in her shoulders. It's really over then. This part is, Marcus agreed. But something tells me Valitech's story is just beginning. The question is, he turned to her fully now, what do you want that story to be? I want it to be something worthy of the trust we've rebuilt, she said firmly. Something that honors the people who fought to protect it. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining naturally. Something we can build together. Marcus squeezed her hand gently, thinking about how far they'd both come. Oh, from a broken soldier hiding in his garage and a CEO carrying the weight of betrayal alone, to this moment, standing together in the growing darkness, stronger for having weathered the storm together. Together, he agreed softly. I like the sound of that. Outside, the city hummed with life, unaware of the quiet moment of understanding unfolding high above its streets. In Marcus's office, two people who had found each other by chance stood hand in hand, their reflections merging in the window glass, while behind them, the wall of evidence that had brought down a conspiracy stood as a testament to what they could accomplish together. The night deepened around them, but neither moved to leave. Sometimes, Marcus thought, the real victory isn't in winning the battle, but in finding someone worth fighting beside. And sometimes, the greatest act of courage isn't in facing down enemies, but in letting someone see who you really are, scars and all. The Valitech annual charity gala transformed the company's atrium into a glittering wonderland of lights and elegance. Marcus stood at his post near the main entrance, his dark suit a far cry from his usual casual attire or military uniforms. He watched as Catherine worked the room, every inch the confident CEO, yet somehow different from the woman he'd first encountered in the rain. Security perimeter report. Rodriguez's voice crackled in his earpiece, pulling him from his thoughts. All clear on the main floor, Marcus responded automatically, his eyes still following Catherine as she moved through the crowd. She caught his gaze across the room and smiled, a private, gentle expression that made his heart skip a beat. The past month had been transformative for Valitech. Under Catherine's renewed leadership, the company had emerged from Sterling's scandal stronger than ever. She'd implemented Marcus's security protocols company-wide, making transparency and accountability the new cornerstones of their corporate culture. The business world had taken notice. Valitech was being hailed as a model of corporate reform. But the real transformations, Marcus knew, had happened on a more personal level. His office had become a frequent meeting spot for employees who noticed suspicious activities or had concerns about company practices. People trusted him, not just as head of security, but as someone who would listen and act on their behalf. Penny for your thoughts, soldier? Catherine's voice startled him from his reverie. She'd managed to slip away from the crowd and now stood beside him, radiant in a midnight blue gown. Just thinking about how different everything is from that night you showed up on that dark road, he replied, allowing himself a small smile. Did you ever imagine we'd end up here? Catherine laughed softly, the sound almost lost in the gentle music filling the atrium. Honestly, that night I couldn't imagine a future at all. I was sure Sterling had won, that everything I'd built was gone. She turned to face him fully. You gave me back my fight. You never lost it, Marcus corrected her. You just needed someone to watch your six while you remembered how strong you are. Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah's arrival. Marcus's sister had become a frequent visitor to Valley Tech since he'd finally started opening up to his family again. She wore a simple black dress and a knowing smile as she approached them. "Mom wanted me to remind you about Sunday dinner," Sarah said, giving her brother a quick hug. "Emma's been practicing her presentation about her school project. She's expecting her favorite uncle to be there." Marcus caught Catherine's eye, seeing the warmth there. His relationship with his family had been another unexpected transformation. The walls he'd built after returning from Iraq had slowly crumbled, helped along by Catherine's gentle encouragement and his own growing recognition that isolation wasn't the answer. "We'll be there," Catherine answered before Marcus could, then blushed slightly at her presumption. "I mean, if you'd like me to come." Sarah's smile widened. "Mom will be thrilled. She's been dying to get to know the woman who finally got this stubborn Marine to rejoin the land of the living." As Sarah moved away to join the other guests, Marcus turned to Catherine. "You don't have to come if it's too much. Family dinners can be intense." Catherine slipped her hand into his, a gesture that felt as natural as breathing now. "I want to. Besides," she added with a playful smile, "after facing down corporate conspiracies and federal investigations, how scary can one family dinner be?" Marcus chuckled, thinking about how far they'd both come. He was no longer the broken soldier hiding from life in his garage, and she was no longer the lonely CEO carrying the weight of her company alone. They'd healed each other in ways neither had expected. "Dance with me," Catherine said suddenly, tugging gently at his hand. Marcus hesitated. "I'm on duty." "Rodriguez can handle security for 5 minutes," she insisted. "Besides, I think the CEO is allowed to borrow her head of security for one dance." As if on cue, Rodriguez's voice came through the earpiece. "Go ahead, boss. We've got this covered." Marcus allowed Catherine to lead him onto the dance floor, where other couples swayed to the soft music. As he held her close, he marveled at how natural it felt. This connection they'd built from the ashes of crisis and betrayal. "You know," Catherine murmured against his shoulder, "I never properly thanked you." "For what?" "For stopping that night. For seeing me. Really seeing me, when I was at my lowest. For fighting beside me, even when it meant putting yourself at risk." Marcus pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "You don't need to thank me. That night. It saved me too. I was existing, not living. You gave me a purpose again. Something worth waking up for." The music swelled around them, but they barely noticed, lost in their own world. The glittering lights, the murmur of conversations, the gentle clink of champagne glasses, it all faded into background noise as they held each other. "We make quite a team," Catherine said softly, her fingers tracing patterns on his shoulder. "We do," Marcus agreed, thinking about all they'd overcome together. "And something tells me our story is just beginning." The Sunday afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of the old maple tree in Marcus's mother's backyard, casting dappled shadows on the gathering below. The familiar sounds of family chatter and laughter filled the air as Emma, now perched on Catherine's lap, enthusiastically explained her science project about renewable energy, a topic that had the CEO genuinely engaged and impressed. Marcus watched from the grill, where he was manning the burgers alongside his father. The scene before him felt surreal, like a dream he'd never dared to hope for during those dark years after returning from Iraq. Catherine fit into his family seamlessly, as if she'd always been there, helping his mother with the salad, discussing business with Sarah, and now playing the attentive audience to Emma's presentation. "She's good for you, son," his father said quietly, flipping a burger with practiced ease. "I haven't seen you this at peace since before your deployment." Marcus nodded, unable to find the words to express how much had changed. 6 months ago, he'd been hiding from life in his garage, fixing cars because machines were simpler than people. Now, watching Catherine throw her head back in genuine laughter at one of Emma's jokes, he felt truly alive again. "Marcus!" Catherine called, waving him over. Emma's just had the most brilliant idea for Valley Tech's new green initiative. You need to hear this." As he made his way across the lawn, Marcus couldn't help but marvel at how naturally Catherine had embraced every aspect of his life. She'd taken a genuine interest in his family, spending time getting to know each of them individually. She'd even started attending some of his therapy sessions, understanding that healing was an ongoing journey they could face together. Emma launched into her explanation again, her hands moving animatedly as she described her vision for solar-powered charging stations throughout the city. Catherine held Marcus's hand as they listened, her thumb tracing absent patterns on his palm, a gesture of comfort and connection that had become second nature. "You know," Catherine whispered to him as Emma ran off to get her project diagrams, "I think we might have a future VP of environmental innovation on our hands." Marcus squeezed her hand, thinking about how far they'd both come. Valley Tech had transformed under their joint leadership, his security protocols and her innovative vision, creating a company culture built on trust and integrity. The scandal that had brought them together now felt like a distant memory, though its lessons remained. Later, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Marcus's mother insisted on making a toast. "To new beginnings," she said, her eyes misty as she looked at her son and Catherine, "and to the mysterious ways life brings the right people together at exactly the right time." Catherine leaned into Marcus's side, her presence warm and reassuring. "Speaking of new beginnings," she said softly, for his ears only, "I've been thinking about the future." "Yeah?" Marcus turned to look at her, seeing the mixture of vulnerability and determination in her eyes that he'd first noticed that rainy night. "The company's stable now, stronger than ever. The new security systems are running smoothly. Maybe it's time for us to think about building something else together." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat, understanding the weight of what she was suggesting. "What did you have in mind?" Catherine smiled, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small set of keys. "I may have bought that property next to your cabin in the mountains, the one we talked about last month. I thought maybe it's time we had a place that's truly ours, somewhere we can build our own story." Marcus stared at the keys, emotion tightening his throat. The property they'd discovered during a weekend getaway, a beautiful piece of land with a view of the valley, perfect for building a home. He'd mentioned offhandedly how nice it would be to have a place where they could escape the corporate world occasionally, somewhere to build a life together. "You really want this?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "A life split between the city and mountains, board meetings and quiet sunsets?" Catherine took his hand, pressing the keys into his palm. "I want everything with you, Marcus. The complicated parts and the simple ones, the victories and the challenges. All of it." Around them, his family continued their dinner conversation, but Marcus and Catherine were in their own world, the weight of the keys in his hand representing so much more than just property. It was a future, a promise, a new chapter in a story that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a dark road. "Yes," Marcus said simply, pulling her close and pressing a kiss to her temple. "To everything." The evening light filtered through the windows, casting a golden glow over the family gathering. Emma's laughter mixed with Sarah's voice as she told a story about Marcus's childhood. His mother bustled around, making sure everyone had enough food, while his father added his own quiet comments to the conversation. And in the midst of it all, Marcus held Catherine's hand, the keys to their future pressed between their palms, knowing that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single decision to stop and help a stranger in need. 1 year later, Marcus stood at the window of his Valley Tech office, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of gold and purple. The wall that had once been covered in evidence against Sterling now displayed photographs, moments captured from the incredible journey that had transformed his life. There was a shot of the groundbreaking ceremony for Valley Tech's new renewable energy division, inspired by Emma's science project. Another showed the ribbon cutting at their first solar charging station, with Emma beaming proudly beside Catherine. Family dinners, corporate celebrations, and quiet moments at their mountain home, each image telling part of their story. The latest addition was from their wedding 3 months ago, a simple ceremony held at their mountain property. Catherine, radiant in white, surrounded by Marcus's family who had become her own. Rodriguez and his former unit members, standing proud in their dress uniforms. Even some of the Valley Tech employees had made the journey up the mountain to celebrate the union of their CEO and head of security. A knock at his door pulled Marcus from his reminiscing. Catherine entered, still wearing the power suit from her board meeting, but with her heels dangling from her fingers. "Ready to head home?" she asked, crossing the room to join him at the window. "Just thinking," he replied, wrapping an arm around her waist. "About that night in the rain. How different everything was then." Catherine leaned into him, her presence as comforting as ever. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped to help me that night, if you'd just driven by like everyone else." "Never an option," Marcus said firmly. "Some things are just meant to be." The company had flourished under their joint leadership. Catherine's vision combined with Marcus's protective instincts had created something unique, a corporation that valued integrity as much as profit, people as much as progress. The security protocols he'd implemented had become industry standard, and Valley Tech was now known as much for its ethical practices as its technological innovations. "Did you see today's numbers?" Catherine asked, gesturing to his computer. "Our charitable foundation has funded 50 veteran-owned businesses this quarter alone. That's twice our initial goal." Marcus smiled, thinking about the program they'd started together, using Valley Tech's resources to help veterans transition back to civilian life, providing them with the support he wished he'd had. It was their way of turning their own story into hope for others. "You know," Catherine continued, "when I was at my lowest that night, convinced I'd lost everything, I never imagined I'd end up gaining so much more than just my company back." Marcus turned to face her fully. "And what did you gain?" "A partner," she said softly. "Someone who shows me every day that strength isn't about fighting alone, but about knowing when to let others fight beside you. A family I never thought I'd have. A purpose bigger than just running a successful company." Their life had found its own rhythm. Weekdays spent leading Valley Tech, weekends at their mountain home where they could shed their corporate roles and just be Marcus and Catherine. Sunday dinners with his family had become sacred tradition, with Emma's endless questions about business and technology keeping them on their toes. "We should head home," Marcus said, gathering his things. "We've got that veterans support group meeting tomorrow morning." Catherine nodded, slipping her heels back on. "You know, every time you speak at those meetings, I see the same look in their eyes that I had that night. Someone who's lost, hoping to find their way back. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stop and help," Marcus replied, thinking about how many lives they'd touched through their foundation work. One moment of kindness that changes everything. As they rode the elevator down to the parking garage, Catherine's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. The security team nodded respectfully as they passed, many of them veterans themselves, hired through their outreach program. "Do you ever miss it?" Catherine asked as they walked to their car. "The simplicity of just being a mechanic?" Marcus thought about his old garage, now transformed into a training center for veterans learning technical skills. "Sometimes. But I wouldn't trade this life for anything. Every day, we get to make a difference. Together." The city lights began to twinkle as they drove home, a reminder of that fateful rainy night that had started it all. Their story had become something of a legend at Valley Tech. The CEO and the mechanic who saved each other and built something extraordinary in the process. But more than that, it had become a testament to the power of second chances, of trust given and received, of healing found in unexpected places. Their journey from that dark road to this moment proved that sometimes the greatest stories begin with a simple choice, the choice to stop, to help, to care. As they pulled into their driveway, Catherine turned to Marcus with the same smile that had first captured his heart. "Ready for our next adventure?" Marcus leaned over and kissed her softly. "With you? Always." Their story continues to inspire others, reminding them that no matter how dark the road might seem, there's always hope around the next bend. Sometimes it takes the form of a stranger willing to stop and help, and sometimes it becomes the greatest love story you never expected to find. Remember, in a world where it's easy to pass by, choose to stop. Choose to help. Choose to care. Because you never know that one simple act of kindness might just change not only someone else's life, but your own as well. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring real-life stories that remind us of the power of human connection and the beauty of unexpected beginnings. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.